The laughter echoed through the
Ma'am, are
first-class
you
cabin
sure
like a
you're in the right
gunshot,
boarding group?
a harsh,
First class
cruel
is for
sound that made
passengers seated
every
up
head
front.
turn. The
Must
flight
be a
attendant,
mistake.
a
People
woman
really
with
try
perfect
anything
hair and a
these days.
sharper
Can sit
smile,
wherever
stood
there's
over the woman
space.
in the aisle seat. "I'm sorry, but this seat is taken," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You must be in the wrong section." The woman didn't move. She just clutched her worn handbag tighter, her eyes fixed on the window. She was dressed in
Ma'am?
a simple
That
black
bag will
dress,
need to
her
go in the
face
overhead
pale
bin.
with grief.
I'd rather keep it close if
She
possible.
held a
It's
folded
just
American
clothing. It can
flag
wait
in her
until we
lap,
land.
the only thing she had
Captain
left of the
Harris.
man she loved.
This flight is an honor
The flight
because you're on
attendant's
it.
smile widened. "Don't you know what first class means? It means you need a better ticket, not some government handout." She said the last part loud enough for everyone to hear. A few passengers snickered. The woman's shoulders trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was trapped, humiliated, powerless.
I'm so sorry. I
But
judged
what
you
none of
without
them
knowing
knew,
your story.
what the flight
We
attendant
all
didn't
make
know,
mistakes.
what the passengers didn't know, what even the
On
captain
behalf of the
didn't know
crew,
yet,
thank you
was
for
that
your
the woman
husband's
they were
sacrifice.
mocking was Dr. Amelia Thompson, one of the most brilliant neurosurgeons in the country. And the flag in her lap wasn't just a symbol. It was a testament to the man who had died saving 27 lives in a helicopter crash. It was the reason she was flying to Arlington that day. And it was the reason that within the next hour, that same flight attendant would be begging for forgiveness. Because sometimes, the people we overlook are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. And sometimes, the people who think they're powerful are about to learn a very hard lesson. This was Amelia Thompson, and for the past 48 hours she had been living in a fog of grief and exhaustion. Her husband, Captain Marcus Thompson, had been killed in a training accident 2 days ago. They had been married for 12 years. He was her best friend, her partner, her rock. Now he was gone, and she was alone. The military had been kind. They had arranged the funeral at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. They had sent a uniformed officer to break the news with dignity. They had given her the flag, but they couldn't fix the hole in her chest. They couldn't bring him back, so she was flying from Chicago to Washington, D.C., clutching that folded flag, trying to hold herself together. She had booked her ticket months ago, using frequent flyer miles from her husband's account. She had flown first class many times with him. It was their favorite way to travel, spacious seats, good wine, a sense of luxury that made their busy lives feel special. But this time was different. This time she was alone. This time she was wearing her black dress and her darkest sunglasses, trying to hide the puffiness of her eyes. She had barely slept. She had barely eaten. She was running on grief and autopilot. When she boarded the plane, she showed her boarding pass to the flight attendant at the door. The woman had glanced at it, then at Amelia's clothes, then back at the pass. "First class is full," she said smoothly. "You'll need to go to economy." Amelia had blinked, confused. "But my boarding pass says first class." The flight attendant had smiled that tight, condescending smile. "Sometimes these machines make mistakes. Let me check." She took the pass and disappeared into the cockpit for a moment. When she returned, she handed it back with a shrug. "Sorry, system error. Economy is that way." Amelia had hesitated. She was too tired to argue, too sad to fight. She just nodded and followed the signs to the back of the plane. But as she walked through the first-class cabin, she felt eyes on her. She felt the judgment. She felt like she didn't belong. And when she found her economy seat, a cramped middle spot between a snoring man and a woman who kept sighing loudly, she felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was already drowning in grief. She didn't need this. She didn't need to be humiliated. She just needed to get to her husband's funeral. That's when the flight attendant appeared in the aisle, holding a clipboard. She stopped at Amelia's row and looked down. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole section to hear. "I believe you're in my seat." Amelia looked up, confused. "I'm sorry, this is my seat," the flight attendant repeated, tapping the overhead bin. "I must have misplaced my boarding pass, but I always sit here on this flight." The woman next to the window nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, she's always in that seat." Amelia felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She stood up, clutching her handbag and the flag. I have a boarding pass," she whispered. "It says 12B, the flight attendant smiled sweetly. "Well, I'm sure there's been a mistake. Why don't you go to the front and have them sort it out? We can't have you sitting in the wrong seat now, can we?" She said it like she was talking to a child, like Amelia was stupid, like she didn't matter. Amelia's vision blurred with tears she was too proud to shed. She nodded again, gathered her things, and started back up the aisle toward the front of the plane. That's when she heard the laughter. That's when the flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a knife. "Some people just don't understand how things work," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably on some kind of government assistance, can't even afford a proper ticket." The snickers followed. Amelia kept walking, her back straight, her head high, but inside she was crumbling. She was used to being invisible. She was used to being overlooked. As a black woman in a field dominated by white men, she had faced her share of discrimination. But this was different. This was raw. This was cruel. This was personal. She made it to the front of the plane where the senior flight attendant was greeting passengers. "Excuse me," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "There's a situation in economy." She explained what happened, showed her boarding pass. The senior flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Gloria, listened patiently. She checked the computer, confirmed Amelia's seat was indeed 12B in first class. She sighed. "Don't worry, dear, I'll take care of it." Gloria marched back to the economy section, whispered something to the other flight attendant, whose smile vanished. The attendant glared at Amelia, then gestured for her to return to her seat. Amelia walked back down the aisle, feeling every eye on her. She could hear the whispered comments, the judgmental glances. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to be anywhere but here. She wanted to be with Marcus one more time. When she finally sank into her first-class seat, a wide, comfortable throne compared to the middle seat she had been assigned, she let out a shaky breath. She closed her eyes, gripping the flag to her chest. She just needed to get through the next 2 hours, that's all. Just 2 hours. But as the plane began to taxi, as the flight attendants started their safety demonstration, Amelia had no idea that her story was about to take a turn she never could have imagined. She had no idea that the pilot, Captain Robert Hayes, had been watching the whole thing from the cockpit. She had no idea that he knew exactly who she was. And she had no idea that within the next few minutes, justice would be served in a way that would make the entire plane stand up and cheer. Act 1, the silence protagonist. Amelia Thompson had been invisible for a long time, not to Marcus, of course. To him, she had always been the center of the universe. But to the world, she had learned to make herself small. It started in medical school, where she was one of only 5 black students in her class. It continued through her residency, where she was often mistaken for a nurse or an orderly. It persisted in the operating room, where older white doctors would question her decisions, where patients would ask to see a real doctor. She had learned to swallow her pride. She had learned to pick her battles. She had learned that sometimes the best way to fight racism was to be so good they couldn't ignore you. And she had been good. She had become one of the top neurosurgeons in the country before she was 40. She had pioneered a new technique for removing brain tumors that was now taught in medical schools. She had saved hundreds of lives, but none of that mattered when she was just another black woman trying to get on a plane. None of it mattered when a flight attendant decided she didn't belong in first class. None of it mattered when the world saw her not as a doctor, but as a stereotype. The truth was, Amelia was used to being overlooked, but this flight was different. This flight was taking her to say goodbye to the man who had never overlooked her. Marcus had been her champion, her loudest supporter, the one who reminded her every day that she was brilliant, that she was worthy, that she was loved. He had been a pilot for a major airline for 15 years. He had flown all over the world, but his favorite flights were the ones that brought him home to her. They had met on a plane, actually. She was flying to a conference. He was the first officer. They had talked for hours during the flight about everything and nothing. When they landed, he had asked for her number. 2 years later, he proposed at 30,000 feet with the help of the flight crew and a little banner that stretched across the cabin. Their love story had been written in the stars, or at least in the flight paths of the planes they both loved. Now that love story was ending, and Amelia was left to pick up the pieces. She had taken a leave of absence from the hospital. She had stopped operating. She couldn't focus. She couldn't sleep. She could barely eat. The funeral was supposed to bring some closure, some sense of peace, but now, with this humiliation on top of everything else, she felt like she was drowning. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the whispers, the stares, the judgment. She thought about Marcus. She thought about their last conversation a week ago. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky," he had said,
Ma'am,
kissing
are
her
you
forehead.
sure you're in the right
"I'll be
boarding
home
group?
soon."
First
He never
class is for
came home.
passengers seated
He had
up
been
front.
training new pilots in a
Must be a
flight
mistake.
simulator
People
when the
really try
equipment
anything these
malfunctioned.
days. I can sit
The
wherever there's
investigation
space.
was still ongoing, but preliminary reports suggested a mechanical failure. It didn't matter, he was gone, and she was alone. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seat belt sign dinged
Ma'am?
off. Amelia
That bag
opened
will
her
need to go
eyes,
in the
blinking
overhead
back
bin.
tears.
I'd
She
rather
needed
keep
to
it close
compose
as
herself.
possible.
She needed to be
It's just
strong. She
clothing.
needed
It
to
can
get
wait
through
until we
this.
land.
That's when she heard the
Captain
captain's
Harris.
voice over the
This
intercom.
flight is an honor. Is
"Ladies
Your Honor.
and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain in your seats for the time being." The voice was calm, professional. But there was something else underneath it,
I'm
something
so
Amelia
sorry.
couldn't quite
I
place.
judged you without
Anger,
knowing your story.
determination. She looked
We
out
all
the
make
window,
mistakes.
watching the clouds drift by. She felt the plane
On
bank
behalf of the
slightly to
crew,
the left.
thank you
Then
for
the
your
captain's
husband's
voice
sacrifice.
came again. "We've been informed that there's been a situation in the cabin. We're going to need everyone to remain calm and stay in their seats until further notice." Amelia's stomach clenched. She knew what that meant. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She heard footsteps in the aisle. She saw Gloria, the senior flight attendant, walking toward the front of the plane, her face pale. She saw the other flight attendant, the one who had laughed at her, following behind, looking nervous for the first time. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Robert Hayes stepped out. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a stern expression. He looked like a man who was used to being in charge. He scanned the first-class cabin, his eyes landing on Amelia. He nodded slightly, then turned to face the rest of the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm Captain Hayes. I've just been made aware of a situation involving one of our passengers." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Every eye was on him. Every ear was tuned to his voice. "It has come to my attention that one of our flight attendants may have treated a passenger in a manner that is inconsistent with our airline's values." He looked over at the attendant, who was now staring at the floor. "I want to make something very clear. The passenger in question is Dr. Amelia Thompson. She is traveling to Arlington National Cemetery to attend the funeral of her husband, Captain Marcus Thompson, who gave his life in the line duty." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Amelia felt her heart stop. How did he know? Who had told him? The captain continued. "Captain Thompson was a hero. He saved 27 lives in his final moments. And Dr. Thompson is a hero in her own right. She is a renowned neurosurgeon who has saved countless lives. They served their country and their community with honor and distinction." He turned to Amelia, his eyes softening. "Dr. Thompson, on behalf of this airline and everyone on this flight, I want to offer our deepest apologies for the treatment you have received. You deserve better. Your husband deserves better." Then he did something that shocked everyone. He walked over to Amelia, stood at attention, and gave her a slow, solemn salute. A full military salute, crisp and perfect. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had been saluted many times at her husband's funeral, at military ceremonies, at the hospital where she worked. But this was different. This was from a stranger. This was in front of all these people. This was for her. Tears streamed down her face, unchecked now. She didn't wipe them away. She just looked at the captain, her eyes full of gratitude and grief. He held the salute for a long moment, then lowered his hand and smiled gently. "Dr. Thompson, I've spoken with my crew. You are now in your rightful place, first class, seat 2A, and I've instructed the rest of the flight attendants to ensure your comfort for the remainder of our journey." He turned to the other attendant, his expression hard. "You will be joining us in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight. We have some things to discuss." The attendant's face went white. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look from the captain silenced her. She followed him meekly toward the front of the plane. The cabin was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Amelia sat there, stunned, overwhelmed, grateful. Gloria appeared at her side, her eyes shining. "Dr. Thompson, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so sorry for how you've been treated. Can I get you anything? A drink? A blanket? Some privacy?" Amelia shook her head, still unable to speak. Gloria nodded, understanding. She leaned in close. "The captain has also arranged for a car service to meet you at the airport. They'll take you directly to Arlington. No more transfers, no more stress." Amelia finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Gloria smiled. "Your husband was a hero, and you are too. We're just sorry it took us this long to see it." She patted Amelia's hand and moved on to attend to the other passengers. Amelia sat back in her seat, exhausted but somehow lighter. She looked out the window, watching the clouds part to reveal the patchwork of fields below. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the captain's salute. She thought about the fact that, for the first time since she had heard the news, she felt like she could breathe again. Maybe, just maybe, she could get through this. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely cruel. Maybe, just maybe, there were still good people out there who saw her, who valued her, who respected her. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. But for the first time in days, it wasn't a tear of grief. It was a tear of gratitude. And as the plane carried her toward her husband's funeral, she felt a tiny flicker of hope ignite in her chest. A hope that maybe, one day, she could learn to live again. Act 2, The Hidden Truth. The car that met Amelia at the airport was a black sedan with a uniformed driver. He took her bag, helped her into the back seat, and handed her a bottle of water and a tissue. "Dr. Thompson," he said, his voice respectful. "My name is James. I'm here to take you to Arlington. No stops, no delays." Amelia nodded, too tired to speak. As they pulled onto the highway, she stared out the window, watching the city give way to suburbs, then to open fields. She thought about the captain's salute. She thought about the look on the flight attendant's face when she realized who Amelia was. She thought about the other passengers, the ones who had whispered and judged, now probably feeling guilty and ashamed. She thought about how quickly people could change their minds when they learned someone's status. It made her sad. It made her angry, but it also made her determined. She was Dr. Amelia Thompson. She was a widow. She was a grieving wife, but she was also a brilliant surgeon. She was a leader in her field. She was a woman who had overcome obstacles that would have broken most people, and she wasn't going to let the ignorance of a few flight attendants define her. She was going to honor Marcus's memory by being the best version of herself. She was going to keep saving lives. She was going to keep making a difference. She was going to keep fighting. The car pulled up to the gates of Arlington National Cemetery. The driver helped her out, took her bag, and led her to the administration building where the funeral director was waiting. The rest of the day was a blur of ceremony and condolences. There were other pilots there, men and women who had served with Marcus. There were dignitaries, politicians, military brass. There were reporters, too, drawn by the story of the heroic pilot and his famous wife. Amelia handled it all
Ma'am,
with
are you
grace
sure
and
you're in
dignity.
the right boarding
She
group?
shook hands.
First class is for
She
passengers
accepted
seated up
hugs.
front.
She
Must be a
listened to the
mistake.
eulogies.
People really try
She
anything
watched
these
as
days. You can
Marcus's
sit wherever there's
flag-draped
space.
casket was carried to the grave site. She stood at attention as taps was played. She received the flag from the officer, clutching it to her chest as she had on the plane, and she cried. She cried for the man she loved. She cried for the life they had shared.
That
She
bag will
cried
need to
for
go
the
in the
future
overhead
they would
bin.
never have.
I'd rather keep
but
it
she
close as
also
possible.
smiled.
It's
She
just clothing.
smiled
It can
through
wait
her
until we
tears
land.
because she knew Marcus
Captain
was
Harris.
at peace.
This
She
flight
knew
is
he
an
was
honor
proud of
because
her.
you're on
She
it.
knew he was watching over her. After the funeral, as the guests were leaving, a man approached her. He was in his 60s with silver hair and a kind face. He wore a suit and tie, but there was something about him that felt familiar.
I'm so
Dr.
sorry.
Thompson?
I judged
He
you
asked,
without
his
knowing your
voice gentle.
story.
My
We all
name is
make
Robert
mistakes.
Hayes. I'm the captain of the flight you were on earlier
On
today.
behalf of the crew,
Amelia's eyes
thank you for your
widened.
husband's
Captain
sacrifice.
Hayes, you're the one who saluted me. He nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. I was deeply moved by your story. And I was horrified by how you were treated. I just wanted to make sure you got to your destination safely. Amelia reached out and took his hand. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what that meant to me. Captain Hayes smiled. Actually, I do. My father was a pilot in Vietnam. He didn't make it back. I know what it's like to lose someone you love, and I know what it's like to feel invisible. He paused, then continued. Dr. Thompson, I've been thinking your story. It's important. People need to know what happened to you. They need to understand the kind of discrimination that still exists in this country. They need to see that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Amelia shook her head. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just want to be left alone. Captain Hayes nodded. I understand, but I think you have a responsibility here, not just to yourself, but to everyone who has ever been treated the way you were treated. He handed her a business card. Think about it. If you decide you want to share your story, call me. I know some people who can help. Amelia took the card, her fingers brushing his. She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. She saw compassion. She saw a man who wanted to make a difference. She nodded. I'll think about it. Captain Hayes smiled. That's all I ask. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, then turned and walked away. Amelia stood there, watching him go, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. Maybe, just maybe, this terrible experience could be turned into something good. Maybe, just maybe, her story could help others. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to honor Marcus's memory by fighting for what was right. She slipped the business card into her pocket and turned to leave. As she walked through the cemetery, past the rows of white headstones, she felt a sense of connection to something larger than herself. She was part of a long line of people who had sacrificed for their country. She was part of a long line of people who had been overlooked, dismissed, discriminated against. But she was also part of a long line of people who had fought back, who had stood up, who had made a difference. And she knew in that moment that she would continue to fight. For Marcus, for herself, for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. She would use her voice, she would use her platform, she would use her story, and she would not be silent, not anymore. Act 3, The Reversal. The video went viral within hours. Captain Hayes had kept his word. He had connected Amelia with a journalist who specialized in stories about discrimination and heroism. She had interviewed Amelia for hours, capturing her tears, her anger, her hope. She had interviewed Captain Hayes, who had spoken passionately about the need for change in the airline industry. She had even interviewed the flight attendant, who had given a tearful apology and claimed she hadn't known who Amelia was. The video was raw, it was emotional, it was powerful, and it struck a nerve. People watched it and cried. They watched it and got angry. They watched it and shared it with their friends, their families, their coworkers. They used the hashtag #AmeliaThompson to share their own stories of discrimination. They demanded justice. They demanded change. The airline, facing a public relations nightmare, quickly fired the flight attendant and issued a formal apology to Amelia. They promised to implement new training programs on diversity and inclusion. They offered Amelia free first-class travel for life. But Amelia didn't want their apologies or their perks. She wanted change. So she did something brave. She called a press conference. She stood before the cameras, her grief still raw, her voice still shaking, and she told her story. She talked about losing Marcus. She talked about the funeral. She talked about the flight. She talked about the laughter, the humiliation, the pain. She talked about being a black woman in America. She talked about the invisible barriers, the microaggressions, the systemic racism that still existed, and she demanded action. "This isn't just about me," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "This is about every person who has ever been made to feel less than. This is about every person who has ever been overlooked, dismissed, discriminated against. This is about the fact that in 2024 we still have to fight for basic dignity and respect." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm a neurosurgeon. I save lives. My husband was a pilot. He saved lives. We served our country. We loved our country, and yet our country still treats us like we don't belong." Her voice broke, but she continued. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to ask for change. I'm here to ask for understanding. I'm here to ask for compassion." She looked directly into the camera. "To everyone watching, I say this: see me, see my husband, see the people around you, see their humanity, see their worth, and treat them with the dignity they deserve. Because at the end of the day, we're all just human beings trying to make our way in this world." The speech was broadcast on every major news network. It was shared millions of times on social media. It became a rallying cry for change, and it worked. The airline industry, under pressure from the public and from lawmakers, announced new policies to address discrimination and harassment. They implemented mandatory training for all employees. They created a new position, Chief Diversity Officer. They pledged to do better. But Amelia didn't stop there. She used her newfound platform to advocate for other causes. She started a foundation in Marcus's name to provide scholarships for NTS of color pursuing careers in aviation. She partnered with organizations that supported Gold Star families. She spoke at schools, at conferences, at rallies. She told her story over and over again, never letting anyone forget. And she started to heal, not completely. The hole in her chest would always be there, but she learned to live with it. She learned to carry it. She learned to use it to fuel her fight. 1 year after Marcus's death, Amelia was invited to speak at the dedication of a new Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. It was a star-studded event, with politicians, celebrities, and military leaders in attendance. Amelia was nervous. She didn't like being the center of attention, but she knew Marcus would have wanted her to be there. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She thought about the flight. She thought about the captain's salute. She thought about the flight attendant's laughter. She thought about all the pain, all the grief, all the anger, and she smiled, because she knew that out of that pain had come something beautiful. Out of that grief had come a movement. Out of that anger had come change. She looked up at the sky, imagining Marcus looking down at her. "I did it, my love," she whispered. "I made a difference." Then she turned back to the microphone and began to speak. She didn't talk about herself. She didn't talk about her pain. She talked about Marcus. She talked about his bravery, his kindness, his humor. She talked about his love for his country, his love for his family, his love for her. She talked about the hole he left in the world. But she also talked about the light he had brought into her life. And she talked about the future, a future where no one would ever have to feel the way she felt on that plane, a future where everyone was seen, everyone was valued, everyone was respected, a future where love triumphed over hate, a future where heroes were honored, not humiliated. When she finished, the crowd erupted in
Ma'am,
applause.
are you sure you're in
People
the right
stood up.
boarding group?
They
First
cheered.
class
They
is
wiped
for
away
passengers
tears.
seated up front.
Amelia stepped away
It
from
must
the
be a
podium,
mistake.
her
People
heart
really
full.
try
She had
anything
done
these
it.
days.
She had
Can sit
honored
wherever there's
Marcus's
space.
memory. She had made a difference. She had found a way to turn her pain into purpose. As she made her way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting hugs, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Captain Hayes standing there, his uniform crisp, his smile warm. "You were amazing," he said. "He would have been so proud of you." Amelia threw her arms around him,
Ma'am?
holding him tight.
That bag will
"Thank
need
you,"
to go
she
in the
whispered,
overhead
"for
bin.
everything."
I'd rather keep it
Captain
close as
Hayes
possible.
pulled back, his eyes
It's just
shining.
clothing. It can wait
"I just
until we
did what
land.
anyone would have done."
Captain Harris.
Amelia shook her
This
head.
flight is an
"No,
honor
you did what
because you're
most
on it."
people wouldn't have had the courage to do. You stood up for what was right. You saw me. You valued me. You respected me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the business card he had given her months ago. It was worn, folded, creased from being held so many times. She handed it back to him. "I don't
I'm
need
so
this anymore,"
sorry.
she said.
I judged you
have
without
my
knowing
voice
your
now."
story.
Captain
We all
Hayes
make
took the card,
mistakes.
his fingers brushing hers. He smiled,
On
a
behalf
slow,
of the crew,
sad, beautiful
thank you for your
smile.
husband's sacrifice.
"You always did, Dr. Thompson. You just needed someone to remind you." Then he leaned in and kissed her gently on the cheek. "Take care of yourself," he whispered, "and know that you are loved, not just by me, but by so many people whose lives you've touched." Amelia watched him walk away, his steps sure, his back straight. She felt a sense of gratitude so deep it almost hurt. He had been a stranger who had become a friend who had become a hero who had reminded her of her own strength. She turned back to the memorial, to the names etched in stone, to the flags flying at half-mast. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the love they had shared. She thought about the life they had built. And she knew that as long as she kept fighting, as long as she kept speaking, as long as she kept loving, he would always be with her. She placed her hand on her heart and felt it beat, strong and steady. She was still here. She was still fighting, and she would never be invisible again. The final act doesn't end with a celebration. It ends with a quiet moment, just Amelia alone in her study, surrounded by books and papers and memories. The foundation she started in Marcus's name was thriving. The discrimination training she had helped design for the airline was being implemented nationwide. The speech she had given at the memorial had been turned into a book, a bestseller, a call to action for a generation. She had been interviewed by Oprah. She had been invited to the White House. She had become a voice for the voiceless. But in this moment, she wasn't a public figure. She was just a woman missing her husband. She sat in her favorite chair, a soft blanket over her legs, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. She was reading a letter from a young girl in Iowa who wanted to be a pilot because of her. The letter said, "You taught me that I can be anything I want to be, even if people laugh at me." Amelia smiled through her tears. She had received hundreds of letters like this. They kept her going. They reminded her why she fought. She looked up at the shelf where Marcus's flag was displayed in a glass case next to his wings and his medals. She could almost hear his voice, warm and steady, saying, "I'm so proud of you, Amelia." She closed her eyes and let the tears fall. They were tears of grief, yes, but they were also tears of gratitude, tears of pride, tears of love. After a while, she stood up, walked over to the case, and placed her hand on the glass. "I miss you every day," she whispered. "But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to keep fighting for you, for me, for all of us." She stood there for a long time, just breathing, just feeling. And then she turned off the light and went to bed. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Not because the pain was gone, not because the hole in her chest had healed, but because she knew that she was not alone. Marcus was with her, in her heart, in her memories, in the love they had shared, and that love would carry her through the rest of her days. She would never forget the flight attendant's laughter. But she would also never forget the captain's salute. And in the end, the salute was louder. The salute was stronger. The salute was the one that mattered, because it reminded her that there was still good in the world, that there were still people who saw her, who valued her, who respected her. And that, more than anything, gave her the strength to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep loving, to keep living. If this story hit you somewhere real, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed, do that now so next week's story lands in your inbox before anyone else. Every week we find the people the world overlooked and we give them the spotlight they earned. Stay with me, this next part is where it all comes together. I'll craft a compelling 6,700-word YouTube script based on your title, following the exact narrative structure and emotional beats required for this genre. Let me create a story that will grip listeners from the first 15 seconds and keep them engaged throughout.